Um, I'm just going to talk a little bit about the story of the binding of Isaac. And for the sake of time, I'm just going to read a little bit of it. And it came to pass after these things that God tested Abraham. And he said to him, Abraham, and he said, here I am. And he said, please take your son, your only one, whom you love, yea, Isaac, and go away to the land of Moriah and bring him up there for a burnt offering on one of the mountains, of which I will tell you. And Abraham arose early in the morning, and he saddled his donkey, and he took his 2 young men with him, and Isaac his son, and he split wood for a burnt offering, and he arose and went to the place of which God had told him. I'm very always fascinated with this story, and especially that the part where Abraham says, "Here I am," and just like that sort of infinite and intense trust and faith. And I've always been interested in the question of, did Abraham know for a certainty that God would not take Isaac, or did he know that he couldn't know, but whatever happened would be the right thing? And he, of course, goes forward with this and draws the knife and slashes what ends up being the animal and not his child, and his child is spared. I went back to to Kierkegaard's Fear and Trembling on this. Kierkegaard's read on it is, this is a quote, "Even in the moment when the knife gleamed, he had faith that God would not require Isaac."
Wow.
I went back to Bob Dylan. God said to Abraham, "Kill me a son." Abe said, "God, you must be putting me on." But I come back a lot to that moment of here I am, and that it's just a story in some ways of incredible trust and of the faith that we sometimes have to feel in moments when we don't have anything else to hold on to, especially in times of scarcity, or in times of where intense action is called for, and intense courage and trust in each other. I feel sometimes in these times the trust in one another is being eroded by the forces that be, and it's restorative to go back to a story about sort of being able to have that kind of outsized faith in the divine or in one another, however you want to think about it. But just that moment of immense trust is so beautiful to me. So that is a passage that I'm grateful to have been able to share with you all today. Thank you.
We've been officially discouraged from preparing written remarks, but I didn't get the memo until too late, and I tend to think that unscripted remarks can easily go awry, and not just for politicians either. So I'm going to try not to be boring. My name is Carl Kirchway, and my subject is the Book of Jonah. On Friday, June 11th, 2021, a lobster diver named Michael Packard, working off Herring Cove Beach on Cape Cod, was swallowed by a humpback whale. Mr. Packard recalls, "All of a sudden I felt this huge shove, and the next thing I knew, it was completely black. I could sense I was moving, and the next thing I knew was, I could feel the whale squeezing me with the muscles in its mouth. I thought to myself, there's no way I'm getting out of here. I'm done. I'm dead." Mr. Packard, who was wearing scuba gear, nonetheless began to struggle and was released. The humpback whale, probably a juvenile, had made a mistake. I present this to you as a case of life imitating scripture. Could we call Mr. Packard's experience a parody of the Book of Jonah? Another parody, this time an intentional one, is Rudyard Kipling's Just So story called How the Whale Got His Throat. In that story, a shipwrecked mariner named Henry Albert Bivens creates such a ruckus inside a whale named Smiler that the whale delivers the mariner home to the white cliffs of Dover with the announcement, Change here for Winchester, Ashwelot, Nashua, Keene, and stations on the Fitchburg Road. Mr. Bivens, described as a man of infinite resource and sagacity, leaves behind him in the whale's throat a grating constructed from the wood of his raft and his own suspenders, a version of baleen, ensuring that the whale will never again swallow a human being. Having done this, Mr. Bivens recites a sloka, a couplet of verse, originally Sanskrit, with a rhyme so awful that Kipling must have been delighted. By means of this grating, I have stopped your eating. As it happens, Professor Jack M. Sasson has explored ways of reading the Book of Jonah as satire, parody, farce, or travesty. He writes, scholars who place Jonah in one of these categories generally agree that the narrator's position is also God's, and that the prophet's position is a surrogate for the institutions or concepts deserving ridicule. I'm not quite sure I understand the satire here, although admittedly there's something comic in the idea of trying to run away from God. So God's ruthless pursuit of the unwilling prophet Jonah amounts to a send-up or rebuke of those who do not listen to and obey God. The story is not about belief, it's about obedience. Jonah believes in God, absolutely. In fact, he knows God so well that he understands that God's order to him to warn the people of Nineveh of their impending destruction is unnecessary, because God's heart will soften and he will spare the city, as indeed he does. And Jonah's being swallowed by the whale is not a punishment, but a salvation. Otherwise, he would have drowned, and his part in God's plan would not have been fulfilled. There's a postscript to the remarkable story of Michael Packard that intrigues and slightly troubles me. It seems that Mr. Packard had not only an appetite for dangerous pursuits, but also a remarkable ability to survive. Before coming to Cape Cod, he was an abalone diver on the West Coast, a profession with a high mortality rate due to great white sharks. But in addition, a small plane in which he was traveling once crashed in the jungle in Costa Rica, killing the pilot, co-pilot, and another passenger. Badly injured, Mr. Packard survived for 2 days before being rescued. It is at this point that, although I do not know Mr. Packard or his religious beliefs, it seems to me that his story, like Jonah's, suggests both that he is running away from something and that he has been miraculously preserved to fulfill that something. This leads me to what I think has been my most important takeaway from the book of Jonah, which is not just that you can run but you can't hide when it comes to God, but that it is a great thing to have been called in the first place. I envy Jonah for having been called, and I envy Jonah's own call, his prayer. In the 1611 King James Bible, it does not lineate this prayer as poetry, the climactic second chapter. But the poetry is there, and the poetry is what it is. Then Jonah prayed unto the Lord his God out of the fish's belly, and said, I cried by reason of mine affliction unto the Lord, and he heard me. Out of the belly of hell I cried, and thou heardest my voice. For thou hadst cast me into the deep in the midst of the seas, and the floods compassed me about. All thy billows and thy waves passed over me. Then I said, I am cast out of thy sight, yet will I look again toward thy holy temple. The waters compassed me about, even to the soul. The depth closed me round about. The weeds were wrapped about my head. I went down to the bottoms of the mountains. The earth with her bars was about me forever. Yet hast thou brought up my life from corruption, O Lord my God. When my soul fainted within me, I remembered the Lord, and my prayer came in unto thee into thine holy temple. They that observe lying vanities forsake their own mercy. But I will sacrifice unto thee with the voice of thanksgiving. I will pay that I have vowed. Salvation is of the Lord. And the Lord spake unto the fish, and it vomited out Jonah upon the dry land. I'm an agnostic, And so my issue is not with following God's plan, but with whether or not God exists at all. As a poet, however, I have been inclined to take the specific details of the world as evidence of the divine. I love the fact that Jonah duly pays his fare before boarding the ship that is to carry him to Tarshish, even though we don't know exactly where Tarshish is. I love the weeds that wrap around Jonah's head while he's on the bottom of the sea, by the foundation of the earth with her bars, or under the door sills of the equator, as Rudyard Kipling has it. I love the little booth Jonah constructs on the east side of Nineveh, and I love the fact that the booth corresponds to what we know as a sukkah. I love Jonah's kikaon tree, which could be a gourd or a palm crist or a castor oil plant. And I love the fact that the book of Jonah ends with God's mentioning a large number of cattle in the city of Nineveh, as if he's keeping track of livestock as a form of real property. There's one more thing I admire about Jonah, and that is the chutzpah with which he stands up for himself and tells God exactly how he's feeling. He's so angry when God spares Nineveh that he says to God, "Take, I beseech thee, my life from me, for it is better for me to die than to live." And God, slightly amazed, responds, "Doest thou well to be angry?" This exchange is repeated when God causes Jonah's beloved gourd tree to wither. Again, God asks, "Doest thou well to be angry?" And Jonah retorts, "I do well to be angry, even unto death." At this point, God must explain to Jonah that there is an analogy at work. If Jonah loves a plant in which he has invested no effort, then why should God not love and spare a city of 120,000 people that cannot discern between their right hand and their left hand? Standing up for oneself is never easy, and although God gets the last word in this book, it's Jonah himself and his human friction who stays in my mind.
I've had occasion to read Ecclesiastes many times at different university functions at our baccalaureate, at lessons and carols and in Marsh Chapel. And what I find is that even though if it's been a year or longer from the last time I've encountered it, it always resonates in the context of whatever is meaningful and significant challenges, celebrations, frustrations, or problems that are important in that moment in what I'm working on or what I'm engaged with. So I think it's really an extraordinarily beautiful and timeless piece that no matter how many times one encounters it, it can be fresh every time. So Ecclesiastes chapter 3, verses 1 through 12. To everything there is a season, and a time to every purpose under heaven. A time to be born, and a time to die. A time to plant, and a time to pluck up that which is planted. A time to kill, and a time to heal. A time to break down, and a time to build up. A time to weep, and a time to laugh. A time to mourn, and a time to dance. A time to cast away stones, and a time to gather stones together. A time to embrace, and a time to refrain from embracing. A time to get, and a time to lose. A time to keep, and a time to cast away. A time to rend, and a time to sow. A time to keep silence, and a time to speak. A time to love, and a time to hate. A time of war, and a time of peace. What profit hath he that worketh in that wherein he laboureth? I have seen the travail which God hath given to the sons of men to be exercised in it. He hath made everything beautiful in his time. Also he hath set the world in their heart, so that no man can find out the work that God maketh from the beginning to the end. I know that there is no good in them, but for a man to rejoice and to do good in his life.
I'm going to talk about two really short verses, one of which took the top of my head off in 1994 when I first encountered it and translated it myself, and another that I've been grappling with for the last 15 years. So the first is Genesis 1:1. Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz. In 1994, I was in college, and I decided I wanted to learn to translate the Bible. So as you do, I went to the one new professor in the religion department who had just gotten there, rumor had it, from a bartending gig in Jamaica. He'd been a bartender in Jamaica somewhere between his PhD and becoming a professor. And his name was Shalom Goldman, and I said, will you teach me to translate the Hebrew Bible? And he handed me a BDB, a Brown Driver Briggs, which is the enormous concordance, essentially, and dictionary. He handed me the first page of Genesis, and it took me all week to get through that verse, and I brought it back to him, and I was horrified. I said, Shalom, the translation I got is, in beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. There's no thee. I had been taught all of these years, it was in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And just that elimination of thee, the fact that it wasn't there in the Hebrew, for years ended up influencing, I feel like, all of my worldviews and poems. Like, everything they told us was wrong. And language is so important, even one tiny word. Years later, I started my first academic job in 2007 at Virginia Tech, which was the site of one of the largest mass shootings in US history at that time. It no longer is. I signed my contract on a Friday, the shootings happened on a Monday, and I showed up that fall to a campus that was deeply traumatized, and I had a 6-month-old baby. Another shooting happened a couple of months later after we got there, right near his campus daycare. And one of the verses I started thinking about really intently was Leviticus 19:18, which is, you shall not take vengeance or bear a grudge against members of your people or your countrymen. It can be translated a few ways. Love your fellow or your neighbor or your fellow Israelite as yourself. I am Adonai. And I went back in and started to translate the Hebrew. And one of the things I was grappling with, Virginia Tech is in rural Southwest Virginia, and I had grown up in New York City. I was Jewish. I lived there for 15 years in rural Southwest, Southern Appalachia, Southwest Virginia. We were 30 miles from the West Virginia border, and I came to rely on my neighbors because I had no family in the area. My neighbors owned firearms, many of them. My neighbors were mostly Christian, and my neighbors were very unlike me. And I struggled mightily with the idea of what does it mean to love your neighbor as yourself. And the verse appears in New Testament too. It's in Mark 12:30. So it's not just in the Hebrew Bible. So I started digging into the etymology of the Hebrew, and the word that's often translated as neighbor is re'ah, which can also mean friend, companion, fellow, or other. And fellow Israelite and other are two really different things. Either the verse is a call for tribalism, you should only love your people as yourself, or the verse is a call for universal crossing of borders. You should love the person who's proximate to you, no matter what their beliefs or feelings, as yourself. And those two things are really in opposition to each other. And the rabbis knew it. If you go into the Talmud, they're arguing with each other. Do you just mean we should love fellow Jews as ourselves? Or do we cross borders and love everybody as ourselves? In 15 years of living in Appalachia, we really did grow to love our neighbors. And I spent many years in my writings, and I think this verse has influenced, as someone who does documentary poetry and goes into the field, I started visiting gun shows to try to figure out why my neighbors felt threatened, why they owned firearms. I started really trying to bridge religious differences, racial differences, all kinds of things, to try to get to the heart of that verse. Like, what does it mean? What are we supposed to do with it? And I think more than anything else in so many years, that's the verse I come back to. And when I think there's this natural, when anti-Semitism is on the rise, as a Jewish person, I tend to fold inward. And I think that verse always pushes me towards opening towards the world, opening towards other people. And my writing in that way too tries to grapple with those questions and narratives that go beyond the easy answers, that go beyond the polemical, that make us aware of the idea that people are really complicated and that narratives are never black and white, that we're always colored by so many different experiences as we move through the world. And so I appreciate that in the Hebrew, Ve'ahavta l'recha kamocha ani Adonai, it's much squishier, it's much more open to interpretation. In beginning, there are many beginnings, right? And we can always begin again with our neighbors and with others.
I'm going to read for you from the very end of the book of Job. Job, the righteous man, God-worshipping man, loses everything he has and has to undergo all kinds of terrible hardship. All his different friends come to him and try to justify his suffering, but he maintains his innocence. Finally, the righteous Job has this fantasy of directly asking God, why? Why are all these things happening to me? In the dramatic conclusion of this book, God comes to Job in a whirlwind and answers him. But instead of addressing all of Job's lamentations, God describes really what amounts to a catalog of creation. And I was asked to say something about how this informs my own teaching. I teach a class on Persian Sufi poetry. And very interestingly, God's response to Job really echoes through a lot of the different themes that we encounter in that class. Through God's response, we understand that wisdom, Gnostic wisdom, which I think what Job is ultimately seeking, is different from knowledge. And it's something that lies outside the realm of the intellect. It is the ambiguity of God's response that highlights the unfathomability of the divine, especially for the human being, where the miracle of creation can be found in the most mundane as well as the most majestic of God's creatures. So this is the very end of Job. Do you give the horse its might? Do you clothe its neck with mane? Do you make it leap like the locust? Its majestic snorting is terrible. It paws violently, exalts mightily. It goes out to meet the weapons. It laughs at fear and is not dismayed. It does not turn back from the sword. Upon it rattle the quiver, the flashing spear, and the javelin. With fierceness and rage it swallows the ground. It cannot stand still at the sound of the trumpet. When the trumpet sounds, it says, "Aha!" From a distance it smells the battle, the thunder of the captains and the shouting. Is it by your wisdom that the hawk soars and spreads its wing towards the south? Is it at your command that the eagle mounts up and makes its nest on high? It lives on the rock and makes its home in the fastness of the rocky crag. From there it spies the prey. Its eyes see it from far away. Its young ones suck up blood, and where the slain are, there it is. Look at the behemoth, which I made just as I made you. It eats grass like an ox. Its strength is in its loins, and its power in the muscles of its belly. It makes its tail stiff like a cedar. The sinews of its thighs are knit together. Its bones are tubes of bronze. Its limbs like bars of iron. It is the first of the great acts of God. Only its maker can approach it with the sword. For the mountains yield food for it, where all the wild animals play. Under the lotus plant it lies. In the covert of the reeds and in the marsh. The lotus trees cover it for shade. The willows of the wadi surround it. Even if the river is turbulent, it is not frightened. It is confident though Jordan rushes against its mouth. Can you take it with hooks or pierce its nose with a snare? Can you draw out Leviathan with a fishhook or press down its tongue with a cord? Can you put a rope in its nose or pierce its jaw with a hook? Will it make many supplications to you? Will it speak soft words to you? Will it make a covenant with you to be taken as your servant forever? Will you play with it as with a bird? Or will you put it on a leash for your girls? Will traders bargain over it? Will they divide it up among the merchants? Can you fill its skin with harpoons or its head with fishing spears? Lay hands on it? Think of the battle. You will not do it again. Any hope of capturing it will be disappointed. Were not even the gods overwhelmed at the sight of it? No one is so fierce as to dare to stir it up. Who can stand before it? Who can confront it and be safe under the whole heaven? Who? I will not keep silent concerning its limbs, or its mighty strength, or its splendid frame. Who can strip off its outer garment? Who can penetrate its double coat of mail? Who can open the doors of its face? There is terror all around its teeth. Its back is made of shields and rows. Shut up closely as with a seal, one is so near to the other that no air can come between them. They are joined one to another. They clasp each other and cannot be separated. Its sneezes flash forth light, and its eyes are like the eyelids of the dawn. From its mouth go flaming torches. Sparks of fire leap out. Out of its nostrils comes smoke, as from a boiling pot, and burning rushes. Its breath kindles coals, and a flame comes out of its mouth. In its neck abides strength, and terror dances before it. The folds of its flesh cling together. It is firmly cast and immovable. Its heart is as hard as stone, as hard as a lower millstone. When it raises itself up, the gods are afraid. At the crashing, they are beside themselves. Though the sword reaches it, it does not avail, nor does the spear, the dart, or the javelin. It counts iron as straw, and bronze as rotten wood. The arrow cannot make it flee. Sling stones for it are turned to chaff. Clubs are counted as chaff. It laughs at the rattle of javelins. Its underparts are like sharp potsherds. It spreads itself like a threshing sledge on the mire. It makes the deep boil like a pot. It makes the sea like a pot of ointment. It leaves a shining wake behind it. One would think the deep to be white hair. On earth it has no equal, a creature without fear. It surveys everything that is lofty. It is king over all that are proud.
I'm grateful for the opportunity to reflect on the impact of the Bible on my work, but I'm also grateful for another more specific reason. The elders in my family have been worried about my immortal soul for a very long time. And I have an aunt who's visiting me from Nigeria right now. On my way here, she asked me, where are you going? And I said, I'm going to be reading from the Bible. You should have seen the look in her eyes. And she actually said, there's hope. She said that. I didn't explain the full context. I'll take it. Like most members of my ethnic group, the Igbo, I was christened Roman Catholic when born in Nigeria. But I came to an awareness of the Bible and its language while growing up in neo-colonial Jamaica after I was adopted into a Seventh-day Adventist family. In that family, the New Testament was for the adults. The Old Testament, with its rules and laws and prohibitions, were for us kids. But all around us were exploding two things that were banned in our religious community and also banned in the wider social world. And that was reggae music and the Rastafarian movement, right? We couldn't avoid this growing up in Jamaica. Converts to the Rastafari faith were everywhere with their dense cloud of marijuana smoke sacraments and their dreadlocks. And there's something about that religion, the Rastafarian religion, it made every damned member just be convinced that they are all prophets. And so everywhere you go, people were preaching. We call them Warner men in Jamaica. They were behind the bushes and the trees jumping out with prophecy, right? At the beach, prophecy. At the roadside, selling fish, prophecy. Sometimes while stealing your lunch money, prophecy. While flirting with my cousins, prophecy, right? But what took me was the language of their preaching, which was also the language of the music, which is the Old Testament. Popular performers like the great Big Youth, the late great Prince Farai, the iconic poet Linton Kwesi Johnson, even the most conspicuous member of this community, Bob Marley, they blended the language of the Old Testament with Jamaican slang and vernacular and the tough guy swagger of Caribbean street life. And as a young person, all that was just irresistible, absolutely irresistible. And that's really how the language and the power and the beauty of the Bible came to me. So what I'm going to read from tonight is also from the book of Job, because it was is a favorite amongst the Rastafarians for a reason that some of you might find obvious if you have even a passing familiarity with the movement and its music. But as I read, please understand, they all talked like this, right? With the Jamaican slang mixed in and the tough guy stuff, they spoke like this all the time in the streets. That's how Rastafarians commanded moral authority, right? Book of Job 30. But now they that are younger than me hold me in derision, whose fathers I would have disdained to have set with the dogs of my flock. They were driven forth from among men. They cried after them as after a thief, to dwell in the cliffs of the valleys, in caves of the earth, and in the rocks. They were children of fools, yea, children of base men. They were viler than the earth. And now I am their song, yea, I am their byword. They abhor me, they flee far from me, and spare not to spit in my face. Upon my right hand rise the youth. They push away my feet, and they raise up against me the ways of their destructiveness. They mar my path, they set forward my calamity, they have no helper. Terrors are turned upon me, they pursue my soul as the wind, and my welfare passeth away as a cloud, and now my soul is poured out upon me, the days of affliction have taken hold of me. My bones are pierced in me in the night season, and my sinews take no rest. He hath cast me into the mire, and I am become like dust and ashes. I cry unto thee, and thou dost not hear me. I stand up, and thou regardest me not. Thou art become cruel to me. With thy strong hand thou opposeth thyself against me. Thou liftest me up to the wind. Thou causest me to ride upon it, and dissolvest my substance. For I know that thou wilt bring me to death, and to the house appointed for all living. Yet he will not stretch out his hand to the grave, though they cry in his destruction. Did not I weep for him that was in trouble? Was not my soul grieved for the poor? When I looked for good, then evil came unto me, and when I waited for light, there came darkness. My bowels boiled and rested not. The days of affliction came upon me. I went mourning without the sun. I stood up and I cried in the congregation. I am a brother to dragons and a companion to owls. My skin is black upon me, and my bones are burned with heat. My harp also is turned to mourning, and my flute into the voice of them that weep. Thank you.
It's been a while since I've been thinking of Bible stories, and I had no idea what I was going to do. And in a moment of panic, I sent an email to a woman rabbi friend, interestingly enough, named Deborah Stein, and because I have a guardian angel Stein that I wrote about, and I said, help me. And it turned out she was on vacation and couldn't. And as soon as the panic subsided, I knew exactly what I was going to do. And I was frightened by that. I mean, how did I know I was going to do Esau and Jacob, that story? And I wondered why. I was very perplexed. And then one thing unfolded as these things come after another, and I realized that this was a story that was waiting to come together for me for quite some time. I'm going to read, it's called it's Genesis 25, 19 to 34. The birth of Esau and Jacob. These are the generations of Isaac, Abraham's son. Abraham fathered Isaac, and Isaac was 40 years old when he took Rebekah to be his wife. And Isaac prayed to the Lord for his wife because she was barren. And the Lord granted his prayer, and Rebekah his wife conceived. The children struggled together within her, and she said, if it is thus, why is this happening to me? So she went to inquire of the Lord. And the Lord said to her, 2 nations are in your womb, and 2 peoples from within you shall be divided. The one shall be stronger than the other, the older shall serve the younger. When her days to give birth were completed, behold, there were twins in her womb. The first came out red, all his body like a hairy cloak, so they called his name Esau. Afterwards, his brother came out with his hand holding Esau's heel, so his name was called Jacob. Isaac was 60 years old when she bore them. When the boys grew up, Esau was a skillful hunter, a man of the field, while Jacob was a quiet man dwelling in tents. Isaac loved Esau because he ate of the game, but Rebekah loved Jacob. Once, when Jacob was cooking stew, Esau came in from the field, and he was exhausted. And Esau said to Jacob, let me eat some of that red stew, for I am exhausted. Therefore his name was called Edom. Jacob said, sell me your birthright now. Esau said, I am about to die. Of what use is a birthright to me? Jacob said, swear to me now. So he swore to him and sold his birthright to Jacob. Then Jacob gave Esau bread and lentil stew, and he ate and drank and rose and went away. Thus Esau despised his birthright. Let me add from another passage that Jacob once impersonated Esau by dressing in his clothes in order to win their father's Isaac's blessing. And blessing is an inheritance and birthright. Well, why this story meant so much to me is that my name is Phil, and a year before my birth, my mother had a stillborn girl named Phyllis. And I grew up in my grandmother's house, and it was explained to me that my mother could have one child. And my birth was because my mother couldn't have a girl named Phyllis. This was my birthright. And I would go to temple where the women sat on top and the men sat below with my grandmother on the high holidays or other holidays. And somehow this story of Esau and Jacob was a favorite, or it resonated in a way that I didn't understand it. When I was growing up as an only child, I would have imaginary friends, and the most important one was a girl, an older sister named Phyllis. And this was my birthright. When I began to write, I chose poets, Neruda and novelist Walker Percy, Whitman, who somehow allowed me to look at my own life, if I look through their eyes, at myself and see myself in a way I couldn't see myself otherwise. So I became fascinated with personas. I in fact started a school based on persona writing. And this idea, I only now, thank you Robert and Annette, understood how all this evolved out of my sister Phyllis, that this was a persona that I would go to for guidance and understanding, and that's how I became a poet. Thank you.
Yesterday was the last day, the 8th day of Passover. And in synagogues around the world, in keeping with tradition, people stood up and chanted in Hebrew from the Song of Songs. Because I grew up chanting from the Song of Songs, among other books from the Hebrew Bible, I thought I would share this with you. So I will be reading, chanting in Hebrew from the 4th book of the Song of Songs. Then I'll read in English, and then I will say something about its significance to me. Hinach yafa rayati, hinach yafa einaich yonim, mi ba'ad letzamatech, sarech ke'eder ha'izim, shegalshu mehar Gilad. Shinaich ke'eder haksuvot, she'alu min ha'rachsa, shekulam matimot, v'shakula ein bahem. Kilchut hashani siftotayich, umidebarech naveh. Kefelach harimon rakatech, mi ba'ad litzamatech. Kemigdal David savarech, banui litalpiot. Elef hamagain talui alav, kol shiltei hagiborim. Shnei shadaich ki shnei afarim, tomet tzivia haroim bashoshanim. Ad sheyafuach hayom b'nasu hatzilalim, elech li el har hamor, ve'el givat halivona. Kulach yafa rayati, umumein bach. Iti milvanon kala, iti milvanon tavoi. Tashuri me rosh amana, me rosh snir v'chermon. Mimonot arayot mehararei ne'emerim. Libavtini achoti chala, Libavtini be'achat me'enayich, be'achad anak, mitzaveronayich. Ma yafudo daich achoti chala, Ma tovudo daich mi yain, V'reach shemanayich mikol besa'amim. No fetitof na sifto taich chala, Divash v'chalav tachat lishonech, V'reach salmotayich kareach Livanon. Gan na'u lachoti chala, Gal na'u mayan chatum. Shilachayich pardes rimonim, Im peri megadim, Kifarim im niradim. Nered vicharkom, Kanebikinamon, Im kolatse livona, Mor v'yahalot, Im kol rashe v'sa'amim. Mayan ganim, Be'er mayim chayim, Benozlim min Livanon. Uritzafon, Uvo iteman, Hafichi, Ganis lo, Bisamav, Yavudo di ligano, Viochal pri megadav. How beautiful you are, my love, my friend, the doves of your eyes looking out from the thicket of your hair like a flock of goats, bounding down Mount Gilead, your teeth white ewes all alike, that come up fresh from the pond. A crimson ribbon, your lips, how I listen for your voice. The curve of your cheek a pomegranate in the thicket of your hair. Your neck is a tower of David raised in splendor. 1,000 bucklers hang upon it, all the shields of the warriors. Your breasts are 2 fawns, twins of a gazelle, grazing in a field of lilies. Before day breathes, before the shadows of night are gone, I will hurry to the mountain of myrrh, the hill of frankincense. You are all beautiful, my love, my perfect one. Oh, come with me, my bride, come down with me from Lebanon. Look down from the peak of Amanah, look down from Sinir and Hermon, from the mountains of the leopards, the lions' dens. You have ravished my heart, my sister, my bride, ravished me with one glance of your eyes, one link of your necklace. And oh, your sweet loving, my sister, my bride, the wine of your kisses, the spice of your fragrant oils. Your lips are honey, honey and milk are under your tongue. Your clothes hold the scent of Lebanon. An enclosed garden is my sister, my bride, a hidden well, a sealed spring. Your branches are an orchard of pomegranate trees, heavy with fruit, flowering henna and spikenard and saffron, cane and cinnamon, with every tree of frankincense, myrrh and aloes, all the rare spices. You are a fountain in the garden, a well of living waters that stream from Lebanon. Awake, north wind, O south wind, come. Breathe upon my garden. Let its spices stream out. Let my lover come into his garden and taste its delicious fruit. I grew up in a Jewish home, a kosher home, in fact. It was a home full of holidays and traditions, Jewish ideas and ideals. And I also went to temple every week with my mother because she was devout. I was a skeptic myself, but I loved the Jewish rituals and holidays. I loved the songs and the prayers and the Jewish learning. And because my temple was egalitarian, girls were allowed to read. And so I became a reader of the Torah and the Haftarot. And also I read from the major books of the Hebrew Bible on holidays. So as I said before, I grew up reading annually from the Song of Songs and also from the Megillah, the book of Esther on Purim. Another reason why I chose the Song of Songs is that I think it provides a rare, joyous, and reciprocal portrayal of love. My field is American literature, and that's the location of my teaching and my scholarship. And the American tradition, as you may know, is full of what I would call difficult, often painful portrayals of love in works such as Lolita by Vladimir Nabokov, As I Lay Dying by William Faulkner, The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison. Love is portrayed in highly compromised terms. It's sometimes difficult to persuade students that these works are really about love. And so it's a pleasure for me to present a work in which love is an utterly positive thing. Thank you.
I had a rather similar upbringing and early experience to Susan's. I came permanently to just loathe the rituals. I just hated them. And it's a pleasure to me to this day not to participate in any such thing. Memorizing your Haftorah, the portion of the prophets that in that time and in that place the young man does for his coming of age, means learning to chant in Hebrew a portion of the books of the prophets. My Haftorah, I was told, was quite an important section. It was for the celebration of Rosh Chodesh, the celebration of the new moon. And through a long, painful summer, not being gifted in music, certainly not in singing, and having no idea what the words meant. In that place and time, it was a poor immigrant congregation. There was no learned discussion of meanings. You just learned. I worked so hard, I think I can still remember the beginning in Hebrew, probably all wrong, and certainly the wrong words, but I do remember, Keomar Hashemayim Kisi Esponeho. I have no idea what that means. And imagine, I'm going to tell you about 2 phases of my responses subsequently to learning what those words that I was piping in my prepubescent voice to learn what those words that I was singing. It turns out in them God is denouncing hollow worship. Quote from Isaiah 1:14. To what purpose is the multitude of your sacrifices unto me, saith the Lord? I am full of the burnt offerings of rams and the fat of fed beasts, and I delight not in the blood of bullocks or lambs or of he-goats. When ye come to appear before me, who hath required this at your hand to tread my courts? Bring no more vain oblations. I'm singing, bring no more vain oblations. Incense is an abomination unto me, The new moons and Sabbaths, the callings of assemblies, I cannot away with. It is iniquity. Even the solemn meeting, your new moons and your appointed feasts, my soul hateth. My grandfather told me, Robert, you're very special. You have a Haftorah for Rosh Chodesh. So I sang, your new moons and your appointed feasts, my soul hateth. They are a trouble unto me. I am weary to hear them. And when you spread forth your hands, I will hide my eyes from you. Yea, when you make many prayers, I will not hear. Your hands are full of blood. Later he says, you make your sacrifice. It's like watching somebody cut a dog's throat. So my first response as an impious person was to be amused, as I've just tried to amuse you, by the comedy of this. And it is comical, it will always be comical and absurd to me. I'm grateful for having had that experience. I think that idea that God did not want slogans, demonstrations, fads, rituals, accepted fashions, self-righteousness, official celebrations, hypocritical ceremonies, bullshit claiming of virtue, extreme self-congratulatory claimings of virtue, solidarities of pacts and cults, that I early on, however ironically, chanted that at this moment as I think, oh, those performances of those passages and the comments on them were so beautiful. Why are there not 1,000 people here instead of 25 or 30? Then I think, I'm proud that you all, whatever brings each of you here, it is not in the spirit of I'm going to bring a beautiful bull to sacrifice, or I know what all of the elders say we must do. On the contrary, something cussed and particular and personal and truthful brought you here, and we heard it from each of these readers. Thank you very much.